stream as part of our efforts to maximize recycling. We have another call to action. We did a call to action last year. Oregonians continue to lead the nation in recycling and addressing recycling market challenges. Now is the time to improve even more and seek the latest information on what is recyclable and what should not be in the recycling cart. Everyone can reduce, reuse, and recycle right. And we also ask people, if in doubt, please find out. For many decades, Portland haulers have demonstrated a strong commitment to providing excellent service to the residents of Portland while also producing sustainable results and consistent operational safety. We look forward to partnering with the city in the future, and we appreciate the opportunity to serve Portland. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank
All
you.
right, then we can.
Thank you.
Thanks. Beth? Not hearing questions, would someone like to have a discussion here, or should we bring to a vote?
I'll make a motion that we recommend the proposed rates.
Second.
I heard Mike for a second. Let's do a roll call vote on this. Or any discussion? We have to do discussion. Practicing this. Okay, no discussion. Go for it.
Backrack,
Yes.
Bortolazzo,
Yes.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larsell, Smith,
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. Motion
Thank you
passes.
very much.
6-0. Thank you, staff. Thanks, Ariane. And Bruce. And next up is Better Housing by Design.
Good job, Eli. You guys are ahead of schedule already.
We're ahead of schedule. I sent a little email here to Bill, thinking he might want to come up too, but we'll see. You can do it solo.
I can start.
So this will be a work session. This is a good opportunity for us to talk about any disclosures people would like to make with regard to the Better Housing by Design project, for which we've got a work session and probable vote today. Are there any? I've got one, but I'll let someone else go first.
Go ahead. I'm trying to remember what my disclosure is.
Okay.
So my principal residence, single family home, is in currently R1 zoning.
And my principal residence is also my aunt in R1, and I own 2 other properties that both would be affected by the zoning, but will not influence my decision in any way.
I own or have an interest in 3 properties with the zoning. All have been built or fully entitled at this point, so they won't be impacted by this project. Any others?
And I've been involved at the early stages of this project as consultants working for OTAC for some modeling work that we've done for the city.
All right. Thank you. I'm supposed to say, while it's not clear whether the proposed changes create a potential conflict of interest for PSC members because the changes affect such a broad class of property owners in multifamily zones, in the interest of transparency, we have just disclosed any potential conflicts of interest. A little out of order, but that's our byline. Then let's move on to staff to walk us through the proposed amendments.
Thank you, Eli. This is Bill Cunningham, project manager with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And
I'm Tom Armstrong, supervising planner on this project.
And we're glad to return to you with some of the closing aspects of the Better Housing by Design project's time at PSC. We had our hearing here in May of 2018, so I think we may be able to finish up within that year-long period. So our
Like
agenda
some other projects.
Our agenda for today, there is a follow-up item from our April 9th session. Tom will be presenting some information related to the displacement risk analysis, and then we'll be moving on to some of the votes we have for the project. First up will be discussion and votes on amendments to the revised proposed draft. The first component will be some previously discussed items that there was a straw vote for on April 9th, as well as some minor technical amendments. those may be possible to move forward as a single consent item. And then there are new potential amendments raised by commissioners. There are 4 specific amendments, and we'll be discussing each one of those in turn. And then once we get through that, there will be the vote on the recommendation to City Council. So those are the items for today. Any questions? All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Okay, and I'll be working off the April 22nd memo in your packet. And this was some additional analysis that we did following the April 9th discussion about the displacement risk analysis. And specifically, there were 2 questions that we heard coming out of that. One is, could we estimate how many additional inclusionary housing units could be enabled or realized from these proposed code changes? And then what is the expected price rent levels of new development? And, what level of household income would be needed to be affordable for a family for these units? And what you see, and I'll walk you through this memo, what you see here is that our analysis shows that the Better Housing by Design changes create more opportunity for larger projects, which creates the opportunity for more inclusionary housing units. But that opportunity, 2/3 of that opportunity is out in East Portland, where the larger lots are. And that faces a challenge of creating financially feasible development, which is the same sort of analysis that we faced with the RIP project, that the achievable rents and market values out in East Portland are not high enough to cover the development costs, the construction costs of a new project, so that even though the zoning is enabling a lot more capacity, it's not clear that the market will be able to deliver all of those units. Specifically to, just to quickly review what the risk analysis showed is we had done a similar analysis to RIP, but that analysis is based on the new capacity created. So in that sense, it's more similar to the Johnson Economics RIP analysis that talked about what's potential, and we haven't done a growth allocation analysis of what's likely to be an outcome over the next 20 years. So this is more based on future capacity. We really focused on the RM1 and RM2 zoning changes because that's where we're going from a unit per acre regulation to an FAR regulation, which provides a lot more flexibility for smaller units and more units inside a building. And that has the effect of both having more projects reach that 20 unit threshold in inclusionary housing, as well as more projects that are already at that 20 unit thresholds, they can have more units, which creates more headroom, more ability to use the inclusionary housing bonus. So we think both will get more 20 plus unit projects as well as more inclusionary units because those projects will have more units in them. At the same time, just wanted to reiterate the benefits we see in these proposed changes in terms of not only the housing capacity, but the increased inclusionary housing bonus, the deeper affordability bonus. And one new one that I left out last time is that there is also a bonus for 3-bedroom family units that are dedicated at the 100% MFI level as well. That was one that we left out at your last meeting. So as I was saying, the changes to the FAR regulations make it easier to have a 20-unit project. The bigger bonus also will lead to an incremental increase in the size of projects. And this chart shows that increase. And what you see on the top, so starting on the left-hand side, you have what we would project under the current comp plan densities. And on the right-hand side is the proposed Better Housing by Design rules. On the top two charts are what we expect to see out in East Portland. And on the bottom is all the other parts of Portland, the inner and western neighborhoods. And as you can see, and this also, we covered this last time, it reflects that a lot of the RM1 and RM2 zoning is out in East Portland. And it also has the larger lots are in East Portland, where that 20-unit threshold is more achievable, and that we expect to see that out there. And this is also shown in the table, which is on page 3 of your memo, where we look at where the capacity, so the capacity differences increases between East Portland and the rest of the Portland overall are about the same. They're slightly more out in the other areas than East Portland. But then when you zero in at the bottom of that table and really look at the large sites where we think 20 or more units is achievable, 2/3 of that capacity is out in East Portland. And then when we look at two scenarios, whether a developer goes for the 10% of the units at 60% median family income, that's the first column under the inclusionary housing yield, or whether they go for the 20% at 80% MFI, that gives you the range of units, and that's how we get to the 3,400 to almost 7,000 units of potential created by this, most of which are 2/3 of which are in East Portland. Yes, Eli.
Other people first. Chris.
So, want to be careful since under
Yes.
RIP we had confusion about the high and the low and where the models come from. So how does this relate to the growth allocation model? Is this affecting the percentage of units that will be affordable, or is it affecting the total number of units? And if it's the total number of units, then how does that fit with the growth allocation model?
So this is not a prediction on allocation or units that will get developed in the next 20 years. This is an analysis of the capacity created by these changes that could be developed 20 years and beyond. So this is more akin to the analysis that Jerry Johnson did, that looked citywide for RIP and which houses and lots are at the value that is likely to be redeveloped.
Okay, so let me try the question again. So is this a zone capacity number, or is
Yes.
this a market number?
It's a zoned capacity number that for the vacant and redevelopable sites that we've identified in the buildable land inventory, the ones with larger sites that we think have enough site area to get you to 20 units over some time out in the future, beyond the 20 years, beyond the 122,000 new households we predict we'll get. Some portion of this will be realized in that 20-year period, but over the long run, we think we're creating this capacity beyond that 20-year time horizon. And we have not yet modeled what the interaction is between RIP and Better Housing by Design and that 20-year constrained growth forecast to see how all that plays out across the landscape.
So this is one view into the Chinese puzzle. You
Yes,
should take it with a little bit of a grain of salt.
it's a high estimate. as to opportunity.
Katie, and then I think Mike.
Yeah, I was just looking at this, and I appreciate that you went to all this trouble. Um, However, I was just wondering what kind of information does it give us? I mean, you said, but could you take it down another level and like, what are you saying then? That actually Better Housing by Design isn't going to have an impact on East Portland because they won't actually build there? Or are you saying that what they'll build or be a smaller, they'll actually build actually smaller units so it won't fill out the sites the way it might in a higher income area?
So I think there's two things there. One is, um, we through these changes we're creating the opportunity for bigger projects that could have more inclusionary housing units in it. So we're removing whatever constraint has been on the zoning
Mm-hmm.
side of things. That can only get you so far on the market side of
Mm-hmm.
things. And the sort of next chart in the memo there on page 4 looks at sort of the differences in the rent levels between East Portland and citywide.
Mm-hmm.
And that the analysis both done by for the Better Housing by Design project as well as for the RIP project show that these rent levels out in East Portland, at least today, can't support all of the construction costs, the development costs, the land values. And that's why we're not seeing that much development out in East Portland. Over the last 10 years, all of the housing units that have been developed in Portland, only 11% of them have been out in East Portland.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, we're creating more opportunity, and we expect some level of innovative developers will figure out how to take advantage of that opportunity and make these numbers work.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not quite at the point of being able to really confidently predict where or how much, especially out in East Portland. We do know that the flip side of that is and which is the last table on page 5, is that especially in the inner neighborhoods where we have smaller lots, these changes will work much in the way that RIP is intended to work, and probably be more successful in the inner neighborhoods, and produce that similar types of housing, and if not a little bit more, because in some areas we've seen sixplexes and larger plexes on these 5,000 square foot lots that predominate in the inner neighborhoods. So I think it's a in that sense we're creating as much opportunity in the inner neighborhoods as we are in East Portland through these changes.
Other folks over here, questions?
Oh,
Oh, more,
I
sorry.
wasn't quite done.
Okay,
Oh,
sorry.
I'm
So
sorry.
I'm still
Yeah,
trying
thank
to think of this
Yeah.
through. And so it seems like all of the analysis that you have done has had that split. You know, if it was in the inner neighborhoods, it had one impact, and on East Portland, it had another impact entirely. But what I wish is that it was easier to tell exactly what was going to happen and what the impact would be. That would be, that would be the kind of analysis that I would really like to see. And I know that this is all new to be even doing much analysis around zoning, et cetera. But I think that actually is the future. And I'm hoping that as this department goes forward, that it starts looking at displacement, not just in terms of even analyzing how it moves through a city, but also how to mitigate.
Mm-hmm.
And that mitigation piece, and I've heard different people talking about it in terms of planning and sustainability. And what I've heard is kind of a feeling that, oh, that isn't what we do. but I think it actually needs to be now. It is no longer. I mean, we had somebody here from housing, and they just don't really know that much about because they're concerned with housing people that are already displaced. But I don't believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe that they're actually analyzing to see uh, if there's uh, zoning and programs that can be put in place to keep uh, displacement from happening. And I really think that that that's the direction that we just have to move in, because it's hard to make a decision without having all the information, and it's hard to make a decision when you're not hearing what we need to do to counteract it. Um, I just was, I just sent out to my fellow commissioners an article from the Washington Post, where they were talking about it was less this style of project and more RIP, style of how the kinds of the kinds of mitigation that you need to put in place to keep homeowners in place. And so I would just really like to see this department really become experts on that and just know what it is that needs to happen. Anyway, I'm a little bit frustrated because but the other thing is that I also know that this project got started without a lot of questions around displacement, and so I realize that you're doing catch up, and the bar keeps moving, and I understand that that's taking place. Just so I understand.
Yeah. And I think just to two things. I think one, and Daisy had said this last time, is this project is a little bit different than RIP because of the potential to create so much more housing units in the neighborhoods where people are under pressure. And then the flip side is I think we share your frustration in that, we have been a bureau that has been about the zoning code and the zoning map, and that these issues require so much more than that, and that we have to retool, and we have to sort out amongst the city bureaus who's responsible for what, and we have to look at all of the layers there, that zoning is one layer, and development permit fees and system development charges and all of that sort of layer on top of each other to make that can be a barrier to development. And we have the Development Review Advisory Committee run by BDS that's a forum for that. But I think we could be much more creative, and we have to be much more innovative to address these issues.
I think you guys are going to be stuck with it. I really think you're going to have to do it, and it'll be, actually it'll be very satisfying work.
Yes.
But unless you stake it out as your territory, it won't get done. Yeah. Thank you.
I got one thing. I'll jump in and then I'll go over to Chris. On the footnote on the second page, it shows the analysis doesn't include large sites that avoid the IH requirement by underdeveloping or arranging to get buildings less than 20. It just seems to me the most large sites would get under 20 units and avoid IH. Is that missing a large amount of East Portland with that exclusion?
Well, I guess I would say, one, I don't think we've necessarily seen enough behavior in terms of like 18, 19 unit projects to say that there's that avoidance behavior yet.
I guess I'm thinking, even if it weren't avoidance behavior, if you're looking at a large lot in like Lentz or East Portland at RM1 zone, if I imagine the development density, I don't think you'd build 20 unit buildings anyway, independent of IH. So that's my intuition.
Could be.
So if that's the case, then we're overcounting maybe significantly in this analysis, the number of inclusionary housing that would get built out there, where the lots are larger and the density is relatively low, which is the focus of this RM1,
Right.
RM2.
And that's why I was saying this is on the high side. Both we didn't try and figure out that, and it's not constrained by a 20-year growth forecast.
Okay.
It's the high potential opportunity we're creating here.
Okay. And Chris had something.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect a little bit on Katie's comment, which I absolutely agree with. I think the national and West Coast market dynamics that are kind of pushing people to Portland are going to continue for a while. The gap between household formation and housing supply, it's going to continue for a while, which is going to make displacement an ongoing problem. And I think, as Katie says, we need to own it. This Bureau and our commission absolutely need to own it. On the other hand, I want to, I've been on the commission long enough, and maybe I'm now old enough that I have the benefit of reflecting on sort of how we process this. And I can remember, some of the first work by Dr. Lisa Bates around displacement risk and this Bureau's efforts to understand that. And we, used it in a crude form on something like the Barber Concept Plan. And I've seen the ability to process this grow. So I want to appreciate what staff has done in that area, while at the same time agreeing with Katie that we have to get even better at it and really make it one of the foremost factors in the decisions we make.
I just want to clarify something. Clearly, to address the displacement and affordability issue, it's going to really require a multi-pronged approach and a programmatic housing bond efforts. There are a number of items as part of the multi-dwelling code update that allowed us to push the envelope a bit due to some of the unique aspects of multi-dwelling development. One thing we had heard time and time again was that a lot of our affordable housing are older apartments that are already there. And can we do something to help incentivize the preservation of that? And we do have a new item here where there's a transfer of development rights for preservation of existing affordable housing. So it's a 4-story zone, and it's an older 2-story apartment building. In exchange for committing to preserving the affordability of those units, you could actually transfer some of the unutilized development potential somewhere else. Our deeper affordability bonus is really geared especially to nonprofit type development, where it's setting at a requirement that at least half the units be affordable at 60% median family income. And those kinds of arrangements, it's harder to apply as well in a single family context. But given the nature of multifamily development, there's some opportunities in this kind of zoning that you don't have as much with the single family zone. So there are some items here where it hasn't been tested. We haven't seen many cities trying some of these things, but we do want to try pushing the envelope some to more directly get at affordability and preserving existing affordable housing.
Do you have something, Jeff?
No, that's good.
Okay. Then I was going to Jeff, but Joe says we're good. So with that, let's.
I'll weigh in because
Okay. Yeah.
just interesting discussion. I have a slightly different take than Katie and Chris in that we start with the zoning code. That's our purview. And I think what Chris and Katie are asking for is really expanding the scope of what our staff does. And I think we need to be cautious about what we're asking for. I think it's one thing when we're working on a large master plan, the light rail extension, and we're doing planning around that to kind of build in some ideas to help affordable housing, to try to avoid too much displacement. But I think when we're dealing with the zoning code, I think there's really a limited toolbox there to tackle these larger issues. And I think we need to be cautious about not overreaching. And I think a little bit of what we saw in RIP and now in Better Housing is Design is we're asking staff to quantify what can't realistically or helpfully be quantified. We don't know how many people will be moved out of single family houses and get redeveloped. We don't know how much of this affordable housing opportunity will ultimately be utilized. We know we're creating opportunities that we all think are good opportunities, whether it's RIP or Better Housing and Design. But I don't want to. I would hate to see us get paralyzed by trying to come up with an analysis that quantifies it. I think we got a little hung up in RIP by trying to do that. We tried to, even though we had a memo that said this isn't exactly reliable evidence, we sort of seized on it and said, let's respond to RIP, some of us did, based on this evidence that's kind of speculative and pretty soft. And so I think we're not doing that now, I don't think, in Better Housing by Design, and that's good, but I think we just need to be cautious about how we are implementing our response to displacement problems and not take every tool that's put in front of us or every idea that's put in front of us and try to manipulate it into a response to displacement. I mean, I think we do helpful things with the zoning code that aren't targeted towards the displacement issue. I think that's okay. We can't solve every policy problem through the zoning code. I think we err sometimes by overreaching in how we use the zoning code to solve problems that aren't efficiently solved through the zoning code. So slightly different view on what we're going to ask staff to do. I think we start with what's realistic in the zoning code. If we're going to go beyond that, I think there needs to be a larger discussion about what's within our ambit. What should we realistically be asking staff to do? So I think we've almost asked staff to go too far with this particular study. It's so speculative. I think the first thing you asked, Katie, was, what do I do with this information? Which was my response.
Well,
No, but that was
I
my
like to-
response. That at some point, give us speculation about, other things that are not really at the core of the zoning changes we're being asked to consider. So
I'm sort of agreeing with you, Jeff. But I think that what we're not doing right now is actually being inconsistent with the way we handled the residential infill project, where we did see a prior analysis with a different lens into the monkey box, whatever that expression was, just Chris used, where we showed that this actually increases displacement compared to the status quo. And actually, staff might be able to remind me of how that analysis compares to this one you're just showing us right now. I know that has to do with number of actual people in the homes that get displaced out. It doesn't. That factor didn't look at what's getting replaced. It's very different analysis than this one. I got that.
I think the problem is they're both so speculative and so based on hypotheticals that.
Was that other one that hypothetical or speculative? Could you, I guess, remind me how that lends into the
right? I think it depends on which RIP analysis you're referring.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking about the Better Housing by Design analysis.
But the Better Housing by Design analysis is more speculative, and the one that we covered last time identified a lot. I think it's 300 or so sites, half of which were single-family house rentals that would be at risk because of the economics involved of the development. That you could do more units on those sites, and so in that sense, it was similar to the RIP analysis that showed in some areas, while citywide there was a decrease in displacement in some neighborhoods, some single-family rental households would be more at risk from these changes. I think from there, the discussion here around Better Housing by Design was, unlike RIP, there's a lot of benefits that are part of this proposal that help mitigate those increased displacement impacts, and they're the bonuses and the provisions that Bill was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And a note from Kat from a little while ago, she said one of the benefits of this project, which she hopes it gets up in the letter eventually, is that it's helped increase clarity on our anti-displacement goals, citywide reduction versus some areas of increase or no displacement, as well as determining or standardizing what analysis needs to be done to understand potential displacement, is something the staff sort of learning as we go through these projects. So I will. You jumping in with something, or should we move on?
I just want to respond to one thing, which was I appreciate the very different tack on the displacement issue that Better Housing by Design is taking compared to RIP, which you're emphasizing the benefits. the opportunity for more affordable housing in particular. We didn't really take that approach so much in RIP, but to say there are not benefits of RIP, we wouldn't be doing it if there weren't benefits. And I mean, one key benefit is we think it will produce more housing, more affordable housing. It may not be regulated, subsidized affordable housing, but it will be workforce housing, which is an equally important goal, the city's comp plan and everything we do. So I think different tacks were taken, and perhaps that's all part of our problem. We don't know how to measure mitigation. We don't know how to quantify it. I mean, we don't know how to measure displacement. We're not sure which tools we're using to mitigate it, and which maybe goes to Kat's point. At some point, if we're going to continue to use this as an important lens, we need to figure it out, because the two approaches are different from a policy perspective. They're different from an analytical perspective. I don't know which one's better. I think both of them probably need a lot more thought and work before we start relying on them to analyze zoning code changes. I don't think we've yet figured out an effective way to measure displacement in terms of zoning code changes. And so I'm not sure if that was Kat's point, but
I think
did want to
it's
be
pretty
clear.
aligned.
There's equally important benefits for RIP.
Right. Joe.
Yeah, just to follow up, to close the loop on this a bit. In the budget that we'll find out about this week, there was a request that the Bureau undertake an anti-displacement action plan. And so it actually would fund us and direct us to move into that sort of topic that Katie was just talking about, for the very reasons you were raising too, because they're not seeing it emerge from a lot of different bureaus touch pieces of what would be an anti-displacement strategy. One of the things that we do is pull the pieces together and try to make it something that we can quantify, and then ask even the harder questions to City Council of the cost of mitigation, and the approaches would be something like this. Are you in? Are we able to fund that? Are we willing to go that? And how does it affect your decision making on not just a zoning thing? It could be transit. It could be a lot of these things. So that work is coming one way or the other for us in the coming year. And we're looking forward to it. Just like you said, it's important work. You know, on this compared to, and I understand the confusion or the fact that there's several different approaches here at play just makes it more confusing. But one piece of good news is this. The analysis, what this analysis shows, and the conclusion that Tom was pointing to, and I think it's even in this slide, where for this type of construction, the basic economics of it in terms of land value and rent is more likely to produce units in inner neighborhoods than outer neighborhoods under current conditions, right? And that's just the opposite of what we heard from RIP, and that actually makes perfect economic sense. It's just there are different scales of projects, different economics of it, and what was bedeviling us about the RIP project is there are fewer, every time a unit is, a house is torn down and replaced, you get more units out of it, but you don't get the scale of development. You're not going to see sites that, you're going to see more in different sites, more likely to be redeveloped with this multifamily product, and it's, at least initially, more likely in inner neighborhoods than outer. So you have, we didn't know how to mitigate initially the RIP one in the outer neighborhoods. This, because of the units it produces, we think is more optimistic about it taking care of itself. But we'll be back with the look at the anti-displacement work to tackle it for the smaller units that are more likely to be in that outer tier neighborhoods.
All right, thank you. I will go back to staff, I guess. Would you like to continue on?
All right, moving on to the potential amendments to the revised proposed draft, reminding commissioners that the revised proposed draft does include the requested amendments from the several months worth of PSC work sessions. So what we'll be discussing now are additional amendments to the revised proposed draft to get us to the recommended draft. On this slide, I've bundled together a couple types of amendments. Amendments 5 to 8, and just to highlight, this is working off one of the handouts you received, which have amendments 1 through 12. Anyway, amendments 5 through 8 are the items that you had straw poll votes on April 9th, where the initial direction was to approve those changes. And then amendments 9 to 12 are minor amendments to the revised proposed draft. And during our last PSC officers session, Commissioner Schultz had suggested just bundling these together as one consent motion. And I'll put that out for you to see if you would like to go ahead and bundle these amendments 5 to 12 as one consent type motion.
Let me ask fellow commissioners if there's discomfort with that, or any items you'd like to pull off consent from this list of 5 to 12 for more discussion or more time to take a look at it. These are items we straw polled last meeting, or they're technical amendments.
Good with it.
Okay, then would someone like to move adoption by consent?
Yeah, I move that we approve amendments 5 through 12 as a bundle.
I'll second. Any discussion? Please call the vote, Love.
Backrack,
Yes.
Bortolazzo,
Yes.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larcel, Smith,
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. Okay, let's proceed to the other ones.
All right.
Oh,
Moving
I'm sorry. That was a unanimous vote. Let's proceed to the other one.
All right, moving on now to new potential amendments that are requested by commissioners. And there are 4 of these, and we would suggest that you consider these each in turn and have the motions and roll call votes on each one of them. Just going through them very briefly, there's one about expanding allowances for daycares throughout the multi-dwelling zones, one for exempting bicycle parking from FAR calculations, another for allowing narrower pedestrian pathways accessing a small number of units, and one related to setting a maximum width for public pedestrian connections for large sites. So that's the total grouping, and I'll move on to each individual proposed amendment. The revised proposed draft has a, let's see, is this? Yes, it's on. Has a proposed allowance where on major corridors, which we define as our civic and neighborhood corridors, sites abutting those corridors would be allowed by right a limited size for daycare uses up to 3,000 square feet. Currently, you don't really have a by right allowance on typical multi-dwelling sites. And the intention of limiting it to the corridors was to really focus services on the corridors, which we have policies calling for being a focus for services and being close to transit and all that. The proposal, and this came from Commissioner Spivak, was to open up that allowance to properties in multi-dwelling zones regardless of location, and thereby expanding some of those opportunities for daycares. And I might mention, we did look into some of the issues related to daycares in Portland and Oregon, and there have been a number of studies indicating that there is a shortage of daycares in Portland and the broader state of Oregon, which has also resulted in Oregon having amongst the top 10 most expensive daycare costs in the country. We can't pretend that any zoning code change is going to deal with all the issues, but expanding the allowance could open up more options, or at least reduce the zoning code barriers to establishing daycares. And the proposal, again, is to allow the daycares not just directly on the corridors, but more broadly. So in this image, that would allow, say, this apartment complex here to include daycares as part of the program. This proposed amendment is something that staff does support, but I'll leave it to Commissioner Spivak to speak more on this.
Well, why I suggested this, it's hard enough to do a daycare facility multi-dwelling sites, especially on larger sites where you have a lot of people living. There's such a natural location to put them, and you already are allowed under the current draft to do it through a conditional use permit, but I'm not sure why we would have that hurdle to create them, because if you change use down the road, you have to extract yourself from the conditional use. Um, I think we should make it as easy as possible. I don't think this will be used very often, and I don't see any reason just to limit it to major streets. So that's why I'm supporting this amendment. Any comments?
I wholeheartedly support this proposal. I just have a question in regards to size. 3,000 square feet feels about right. I mean, I think you're saying 60 children, plus minus. I'm just wondering, since sounds like you've done some research statewide, if there was a certain size that really works from an economic standpoint, as well as the logistics of it, and just trying to right size the what we allow, if 3,000 is enough or if it's too big or too small.
I wasn't able to get good information on just the range of typical sizes for daycares. Part of the intent of limiting it by right to 3,000 square feet is there's still an intent that residential development will be the predominant use in the multi-dwelling zones. So there's some interest in keeping some limit to the size allowed by right. You currently already, for residential development, allow home childcare uses up to 16 children for, say, any house. And so this would bump up that potential to potentially 60 children, given that state guidelines are for 50 square feet per child. But I don't think there's a magic number as to what's going to work in the broadest array of cases. There still would be that opportunity to, as a part of a conditional use, to seek a larger scale development. There are also existing allowances where in places of worship or former places of worship, you could have a daycares, and those are often scattered amongst our residential neighborhoods. But this would provide a clear way forward for at least moderately sized daycares in the multi-dwelling zones. And in a way, one thing we had heard too was it can be difficult for daycares to compete with commercial retail tenants in commercial zones. So this does provide a situation where you're not competing for space with retail tenants.
Interestingly, there's a huge number of not huge, a lot of daycares end up in old churches that are seismically not, they're not seismically upgraded, because that's the cheapest rent, and because it's an assembly space, which is the same use classification, so it doesn't trigger a seismic retrofit. So there's good reasons that's where our kids have been in daycares in those situations, and there's a natural sort of funnel towards those non-seismically reinforced buildings because that's where the rent's cheap and you don't have to get a change of occupancy to put the daycare center there. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I would like to move adoption of this. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any comments? Okay, call the vote, please. Thanks.
Backrack,
Yes.
Bortolazzo,
Yes.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larcel, Smith,
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. Thanks. Let's go next.
All right, moving on to the second potential amendment. This was suggested by Commissioner Spivak as well. And this would be a revision of an existing proposed allowance. Currently, the revised proposed draft exempts vehicle or structured parking from the FAR calculations up to a 0.5 to 1 FAR, and that's intended to complement our trying to encourage development to avoid surface parking and to do structured parking. It also mirrors a regulation that's already in the mixed use zone, so exempting structured parking would apply in both the mixed use and multi-dwelling zones. Now, as part of the bicycle parking code update, they updated the mixed-use zone regulations so that bicycle parking is also exempted from those FAR calculations, so that providing that required bicycle parking doesn't take away from floor area that could be residential units. And the proposed amendment would extend that exemption not just in mixed-use zones, but also apply the required bicycle parking exemption to multi-dwelling zones. Staff supports this. It provide consistency between the proposed regulations in the commercial mixed-use zones and the multi-dwelling zones.
Okay. Any comments on that, Chris?
Yeah, I want to peel the onion back a couple more layers. So, I support this. The same logic for making the bike rooms exempt from FAR limits that we had for mixed use applies here. But as I understand it, that code itself is perhaps still a little bit of a work in progress. You'll recall that we spent a lot of time talking about in-unit parking versus bike room parking. This language was created to exempt the bike rooms, but I think staff believes that the existing language in the bike parking proposal would also exempt the FAR for the in-unit space, which to me doesn't make as much, and we didn't dive into that as we were shifting things around with the in-unit parking. To me, that doesn't make a lot of policy sense because with the bike room, you have space you are dedicating to the purpose of bike parking. In the in-unit, you could be hanging clothes in that space if you want to. There's no requirement that that space be used only for bike parking, and I don't think it makes sense to give an FAR exemption to the in-unit space for that reason. And I believe the bike parking staff is pursuing some language concepts for that would be introduced at City Council. I just want to make sure PSC is aware of that as we consider this, and that obviously my preference is that the two sets of code remain consistent through whatever the process is. So with that, I'm happy to move this.
I would like, before we go to on discussion, I would take as a friendly amendment where it's in yellow light. I hadn't thought about this issue. And required long-term bicycle parking outside of dwelling units to be within the FAR. What would you think of
And
that?
I think staff's concern, staff speak for themselves. I think our concern will be that we don't want this to be different than the code we voted on for, for the mixed use. So while that's an excellent idea,
Okay.
I think we should let staff evolve that as part of the process of bringing both packages to council rather than have us send one version in one package and a different version in another package.
Okay, and I have a process question on that. When you say two packages, do you mean this and the bike?
The bike parking code amends the mixed use code around this topic.
This amends the mixed use code too in some areas, if I'm correct. There's several places where this amends both codes as well.
In this case, it's only for the multi-dwelling zones because there's another active project, the bicycle parking code update, that uses the exact same language for the mixed-use zones. We did have a discussion with the bicycle parking update staff, and they acknowledged that some fine-tuning would be merited. This bicycle parking code update staff summary of the proposals had indicated that FER for things like bicycle parking rooms, dedicated parking, bicycle parking would be exempt from the FAR, but the code wasn't written that way. So they are considering some staff suggested amendments on the way to City Council that would revise it so that it applies to required long-term bicycle parking outside of residential units. But staff's take is to let the bicycle parking project lead with that amendment. So once they settle on the very specific language based on their probably more in-depth discussion, they would propose that change to City Council, and in turn we'd propose a similar change to City Council. But our intent at this point was to use the exact same language that the bicycle parking code
Let me
had for
modify my
mixed
motion
use.
a little bit. So I would move that we approve this amendment and that we direct staff to track policy developments on this point in the bicycle parking project and apply parallel changes to this particular section of the code.
Okay. Understood. I would second that
Thank you.
proposal. Any discussion? Okay. Let's call the vote for that.
Backrack,
Yes, but technically we're now approving the amended, and then we'll come back and have to approve the full.
Oh, I'm sorry. So
right?
let's get some process here. So I'm supposed to.
Well, actually, no, because do we
That's your
approve
proposal.
amendment?
I guess.
Just voting on this amendment.
Okay. Okay, yes to the amendment.
And Chris has added
And
some
a
direction,
direction to staff that goes with it.
which can really go into a letter or some other way. Yes.
Yes.
Bortolazzo,
Yes.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larcel, Smith,
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. That was unanimous. Next one.
All right, thank you. The third potential amendment is a revision to the pedestrian standards. I'm not going to go into a great amount of detail, but the revised proposed draft has pedestrian pathway widths that vary depending on the number of units on the site. The language also included an allowance where pathways connecting only to an entrance of a small number of units, which are defined as 1 or 2 units, could be as narrow as 3 feet. And the proposed amendment proposed by Commissioner Spivak is to allow that narrower 3-foot wide width for entrance pathways that provide connections to up to 4 units. That would be
Mentioned is what the current code allows.
yeah, the current code is actually written that way, and the revised code also keeps that narrower allowance for sites with up to 4 units. Now, the way this revised amendment would work is that even if you have a much larger number of units on a site, it could be 30 or 40, and generally that would require a 5-foot wide walkway, but the individual the pathways accessing entrances serving no more than 4 units could be as narrow as 3 feet. So it basically would be keeping with the intent of the code revisions, but allow these narrower pathways connecting to up to 4 units. And part of the intent is to reduce the amount of paved area on sites, allow other elements, but I'll let Commissioner Spivak speak to that.
Okay. This is a fat code packet, and I pulled this one out of it. I think that the intent of my original, when we did straw polling, I'm going to say last year sometime, I suggested an option to not have to build 5-foot wide concrete paths, and I wanted to just be a little narrower. And as staff implemented that, they increased the number of situations where we have to do 4-foot wide ones instead of 3-foot ones, because the current code lets you do 3 feet, serves up to 4 units. I just wanted to preserve that option as they implemented the as we set the 4-foot threshold. It's less impervious. It's an option for less impervious surface. That's my reasoning for this. Question.
Can I just confirm that we don't create any ADA issues by going down to 3 feet?
That would be a building code issue. My understanding is that even ADA access ramps could be 3 feet. So you don't need 5 feet for purposes of ADA.
Thank you.
Any other questions, concerns? Then I will move this amendment. Is there a second? Katie is going to get this one. We'll mix it around. And any discussion? Let's call the vote.
Backrack,
Yes.
Bortolazzo,
Yes.
Hauk,
Yes.
Larcel, Smith, Spivak.
Yes, that passes unanimously. The fourth item, please.
Thank you. The fourth new potential amendment is one related to a provision that is both proposed for the multi-dwelling zones and as an existing adopted code provision in the mixed-use zones. This provision has a requirement that for large sites that are more than 5 acres in size, not very common, just very large sites, that pedestrian connections, dedicated public access pedestrian connections be required that meet the cities and the regions' connectivity standards, which call for pedestrian connections once every 330 feet. The revised proposed draft language and the language in the mixed-use zones does not specify a specific width for the pedestrian connections. It's left to PBOT to determine what is the appropriate width and what elements are required within that pedestrian connection right-of-way. The proposal would set a maximum width for these required pedestrian connections of 15 feet. I did want to highlight some issues. There are guidelines that PBOT uses for pedestrian connections. Typically, a pedestrian connection right-of-way is 15 feet, but PBOT does see situations where in some cases they may need a bit more space to deal with things like site clearances or providing space for lighting fixtures or trees. That 15-foot dimension includes both the pathway itself as well as typically a buffer on both sides. In some cases, you may need a bit more space if there's a slope. One issue staff's identified with this potential amendment, and which is behind staff's reluctance to support it, in fact, we do not support this, is that Title 17 provides the PBOT and the city engineer with authority over public streets and right-of-way. And our zoning code itself in 3310 specifies that aside from land division and some specific situations, that the Portland Bureau of Transportation is responsible for determining the standards for streets. So staff has some concern about embedding in the zoning code a maximum width for pedestrian connections, which are a kind of street, that Title 17 gives PBOT and the city engineer the authority for. So it does potentially set up a code conflict where if Title 33 is saying one thing about public pedestrian connections, but Title 17 provides PBOT with the authority to.
One moment here, we have a sound issue, or else we have an indigestion issue, or both.
I think that's coming from outside our room. Sounds like a
okay, or we have a pile driving issue, a construction issue. Thank you. Well, let's continue then.
One thing PBOT did want to relate to us too is one thing they're concerned about when requiring a dedication is that they are having to think about proportionality of what they're requiring in relationship to the development on the site, and they do typically try to keep to their pedestrian standards, but they would like to revise the authority or retain the authority to ask for greater widths when it's needed. And so often with transportation, there's some site-specific issues. So, basically the amendment, again, it would set a maximum width for that required pedestrian connection. It's something that staff believes is not appropriate for the zoning code. It's a pedestrian connection street standard that Title 17 provides authority elsewhere for. But with that, I can leave it to Commissioner Spivak as well to speak on it.
Okay. Well, this is not one I'm ready to pick a big fight on, but I wanted to bring it to the attention of commissioners. The reason I proposed this amendment was because there are certain large lot situations where a developer brings it in and the developer knows that if they're going to do a subdivision, then PBOT's going to get in the mix and require some sort of route through the middle of it, a dedication. And PBOT that's their hook to require a street to go through. And when they require the street to go through, they can set the terms on how big that street is, and it can effectively stop a development from happening because the developer can go to the site next door and not have that requirement, and therefore the street never gets built. So in this situation, we have a large site where a developer is doing a project, which is basically an apartment complex. When I first read this, I thought, well, this gives PBOT a hook to push a right-of-way through that site that they otherwise wouldn't have. And that might stop a development from happening. Even in an area where arguably you kind of want to have the additional connectivity. So I wanted to say, well, yes, let's let PBOT require the right-of-way through there, but let's make sure it really is a pedestrian width right-of-way, and they don't, because there's a difference between how much space may be needed for a pedestrian right-of-way and how much PBOT might want. And PBOT might want a dedication that's wider, and there's no bounds on that. They might end up getting something wide enough to, a 25-foot wide right-of-way. That might be wide enough to run not just bikes goes through, but people that, vehicles could go through there, and I wanted to set bounds on how much they could take out of the site in that condition. I've since learned through staff's help that PBOT has that right anyway. They just haven't exercised it in these situations. So if there's a large site development where there's not street connectivity every 330 feet, then PBOT already has a right, even if you're not doing any kind of land use subdivision, to require a right-of-way dedication through the middle of it. I didn't know that, and knowing now that PBOT has a right anyway, then they can already do this whether we put it in the code or not, frankly. So I don't feel as vested in the outcome of this amendment as I did first proposed it. Chris.
So a few questions. So is the motivation here to not allow excessive PBOT requirements to block development, or is it to minimize impervious surface? Or
It's not to allow excessive requirements. Well, once PBOT has the right to make a requirement as a condition of development,
right.
I have a concern that especially in areas of the city that are where there's a lot of large lots and it's not well connected, that they might require a dedication that is wide enough that it thwarts development, and development is happening other places instead. And my ideal world would be to have the connection go through, but make sure it's narrow and not expensive to build, not expensive stormwater facilities and all this stuff, so it actually happens. It feels to me like in East County, particularly, when there are opportunities to have connected, to reconnect the grid, at least for peds and bikes, sometimes we lose those opportunities because the requirements to actually connect through are so expensive that developers flee them or flee the sites that would require them.
All right. So the requirement for dedication is based in Title 17. Is that correct?
Yes, Title 17 includes the connectivity standards, and it's worded so that PBOT has authority to require them for any development or redevelopment.
And I assume there are comp plan policies that would balance the potential limitation of development against the connectivity goals, right? There'd be a balancing test that applies somewhere. So if PBOT were to be, ridiculous about their dedication requirements, there'd be a balancing test against other comp plan policies that could be used to.
Yeah, I think you
that.
can. There's a couple in there that you could find. Plus just the general. I think they're more concerned about the Supreme Court rulings around takings and the nexus and the proportionality
So
requirement.
I guess the idea of using Title 33 to regulate rights that are given in Title 17 makes me very queasy.
Well, that's what caused me to. When I realized that those rights were there, that's why I lost excitement for this amendment. Frankly, I still wonder though if someone were in that situation you described, what their course of response would be if PBOT said you need to do this very wide, expensive right of way with stormwater facilities and street lights, and that may prevent development from happening that otherwise might proceed with a narrower, a simpler right of way that would still provide connectivity.
Personally, I'd call an Oregonian reporter and
Okay, well,
make PBOT look stupid.
I really understood. Other comments, Ben?
I wonder if you can refresh my mind. There was a parallel PBOT study that was done in parallel to the Better Housing by Design that kind of looked into greater flexibility for right-of-ways, especially in East County. How would that piece of the puzzle fit with this proposal? Understanding that they're somewhat different.
They both, I believe you're referring to the Connected Center Street Plan, which is actually an appendices to this document, and that was looking at new, narrower types of street connections that could work in more situations, especially some of these small, narrowish sites, so they can get connectivity in a lot more of East Portland. This is somewhat different in that it's about connectivity, but it's about very large sites, so almost the opposite end of the spectrum. But you are correct that there is a relationship in that in the Connected Center Street Plan was really focusing on ways of doing less land consumptive types of connections. So it does convey PBOT's interest in coming up with new kinds of connections that will work in more situations. I should also mention that PBOT is, I believe they're currently updating their pedestrian design guidelines, which set some of the dimensional standards for pedestrian type facilities. If any commissioner is interested in it, you might want to take a look at that. Denver Garda is the PBOT staff person who had worked in conjunction with this project, and I believe he's also involved with the update to some of the street standards.
Jeff.
somewhat related to this issue, I can tell you, as your representative on DRAC, that a very common issue that arises, complaint that gets raised at DRAC, there are two things that are somewhat contradictory. The first one is complaints about conflicts between Title 33 and Title 17, that we will put things that are required in the zoning code, but then when you get to PBOT under Title 17, they sort of have broader authority and they sometimes, in effect, trump what's in the code. And so this just creates, from a developer standpoint, just a difficult conflict to navigate. The other related complaint is, unlike Title 33, which is supposed to be clear and objective regulations, Title 17 is, PBOT manages it by guidelines. And so you often get the situation with PBOT is there's no clear standard. And so you go in and you're stuck negotiating with PBOT, and ultimately the bad news is they have a lot of regulatory authority to make you do whatever they want. The good news is what developers sometimes want is flexibility. So you don't have the rigid requirements of Title 33, but you have this open-ended negotiating process. So I don't know if this proposal makes a difference.
Yeah.
PBOT's going to do what they want, and even though the zoning code will say you don't have to give more than 15 feet, you won't get what you want out of PBOT. If they want 18 feet, they will leverage you, and they'll get 18 feet.
Right. Well, I think that was an excellent summary from my perspective of the lay of the land,
Yes.
and I am willing to withdraw this amendment, and proceed. So unless someone wants to introduce it over my head, that's fine. Then I'd say we should move forward to the next step, which is to look at the entire project.
Yes, we are moving to the vote on the entire package and your recommendation to City Council. The recommendation, I'm just going to read it out. It's somewhat complex. There are two parts to it. One is about your recommendation to City Council. The second part is about your direction you're providing to city staff. And the recommendation to City Council is that you recommend that City Council adopt the Better Housing by Design revised proposed draft, volumes 1 to 3, as amended, and appendices A through G as legislative intent and background, and that City Council amend the zoning map and the comprehensive plan map as shown in volume 1, and this includes the new palette of multi-dwelling zones. And then 3, amend the zoning code and the comprehensive plan as shown in volumes 2 and 3. And then the second part of the motion is to direct staff to revise the staff report and code commentary to clarify proposals and findings as necessary. For example, bringing in these new amendments, we would be adding commentary to explain it. And then the fifth item, I'll read it and then explain it. In the event that the Better Housing by Design project is considered by City Council prior to the residential infill project, make necessary changes to volumes 1 through 3 to accommodate this change in sequencing. There is a possibility that the Better Housing by Design project could be reaching City Council before the residential infill project. And there's some code sections that we had developed in concert with the residential infill project, such as there's some chapter 266 limitations on front parking. And because RIP was moving forward first, that code amendment section was with RIP. If the Better Housing by Design project is to move forward first, the thinking is we need to reposition some of these code amendments that you had considered improved into Better Housing by Design. And in some cases, we had used as the base regulations for some of our amendments in BHD, the proposals in RIP, assuming that it was going first. So there's some, basically substance would always stay, but if the sequencing of the projects moving forward changes, because we were purposefully moving forward in a concerted, coordinated way, we may have to shift some items into the Better Housing by Design project.
I would like to support. We can do these in two different votes, two different motions.
I think it's one motion of about all 5 items.
Okay, then I'd like to discuss that last item because I guess I would like a little more clarity on what would be bundled. I can understand some renumbering, and the sequencing. But I guess I call attention to the potential that what if one passes, the other one doesn't pass, and whether there's a reason to not pull things from one code to the amendment to the other in case written never gets passed by City Council.
Well, if I could answer, what we'd like to do is, as of now, we have to do a thorough sort of search through them both to give you a concrete list of what those changes are. We believe that the only substantive item from RIP that we would pull over is the one Bill mentioned about parking, restricted parking in the front of buildings. However, there could be more. And so what we'd like to propose is to let us complete that work and bring that to PSC leadership and sort of lay out the list. We think most of these are just numbering sort of changes or technical things. And if anything crosses a line that needs to be reconsidered, we can all come back and do that here. We're just not sure yet, Ela, and I didn't want to represent that we know because every time I would do that, we would be wrong. So I want to take the time it takes to really be thorough and give you the full up straight answer.
Okay. And I'm comfortable, obviously, with numbered changes. But if we start solving problems that RIP was adopted to solve, like height, for example, with this project, then people might say, well, we don't need RIP.
Right.
So that was the concern that I wanted to raise as a commission, because we don't control what happens after it leaves the commission here.
And we heard you with that, and like we could do height now, we don't have to. And to the extent that that crosses this line where it looks like it's moving some RIP benefits before it should be timed, we can just not do that. So we'll share that list before we move forward with him. And we just don't know really the sequencing of the two and how it's going to play out. We just want to be prepared to be able to keep moving forward with the adoption of both BHD and the consideration of residential infill. And thirdly, the package that ties them all together is this anti-displacement action plan we expect to be asked to do. So they come together. They don't all have to be done at the same time, but they have to be moving, they're best moving together.
Any comments or discussion on these items here?
Can you explain that, Joe? What do you mean they all need to be? What's the implication of the displacement? I thought the displacement was a budget item.
No, it's just the missing piece. If you were to think of a complete package, like we just had the discussion tonight, what we were asked for in the residential infill discussion, what we're less, which seems to be an issue, but less of a pressing issue with the better housing by design discussion, is something thought through and potentially funded, but at least something thought through and understood what it would take to implement it in place to address displacement risk, increases the public's and city council's confidence that these packages are fully supportable. And that's in part why we've been asked to do the anti-displacement action plan too. Doing that plan, we've been working with the Policy Link and an inter-bureau task force, a team, for almost a year now on some really foundational work in that regard, but we haven't done anything like this action plan, and this is an outgrowth of that. It's going to take as much time to do as it needs to, but so it won't hold up what we're trying to say. It won't hold up these code projects, but it needs to be in motion, so they sort of work as a package. Does that make sense, Jeff? They're not strictly linked. One does not, unless the city council in this case makes the choice to hold off on one or both or either until they have anti-displacement measures figured out. We believe that we can keep moving forward in this way.
And should we add to this list the bike code item that Chris mentioned? Just, or is that already captured here effectively?
I think that was captured in the amendment.
Staff direction?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Chris.
So I will move items 1 through 5 from these two screens.
I'd like to second that.
Okay, any discussion?
Second.
Okay, let's call a vote, please.
I'm happy
Discussion?
to vote yes. I'm pleasantly surprised that this has gone through with so much less public consternation than RIP. Even though I think in a lot of ways this could have a larger impact on development citywide in the years to come. So I'm happy to vote aye.
Bortolazzo,
Yes.
Howe, Marcel,
I just want to say thank you for this project. I know I made a lot of noise at the beginning, partly because it just kind of occurred to me. Oh my goodness. Planning and sustainability absolutely has to get involved in this, and so it was my opportunity to say that. But I wasn't saying it in against this project. And I think it's I was on the committee that looked at it, and I think it's going to have a really a good impact. And I also don't feel like it has the same kind of neighborhood wide displacement that RIP has the potential for. It's still very hard looking at these studies to really know what's going to happen. So we're still kind of going on intuition. And but yes, I'm voting for it. I think it's a great project.
Smith,
Yes.
Spivak.
Yes. And I'd like to, since we have a couple minutes, see if any commissioners have things they would like to include in the letter that goes along with this to City Council. And I have a couple ideas, but I wanted to open up the floor to others who might want to give staff some ideas. Okay, well, I'll toss out my idea. It is that, I think that one is that I think this should be presented to City Council as a companion piece of code with the residential infill project, and really somehow capture that it's a package. We're sort of stepping up the FAR, single dwelling zones, multi-dwelling zones, mixed-use zones, and so they go together. I feel like with the RIP vote, we cast with our vote our concerns about displacement that's happening. And I think we should, in our letter, as we did with the other one, include something in the letter saying that with this package, we don't have to reference the other one or not, whether we do or not, but we know that there will be people displaced from homes that are redeveloped, and we're comfortable with that. And that we restate our enthusiasm for the city to fund and some work by this commission to study displacement. And I think that to be active on that, and I'm not going to, I think that we have great mitigation in both projects. And I think that we should be consistent, since this project has the people who are losing their housing based on redevelopment. This project doesn't give them a place to live either. And it's an issue that if we're going to think of it as a commission, that we should think of it in both parts of the city. And we've already written in our last letter that we support the city to look at displacement issues. And I think that this would be a similar project to do the same.
So I guess I have a little trouble with the notion that we're okay with displacement. I think it's fair to say we recognize, as with RIP, there are displacement risks here. I think, at least as I've heard the discussion, there's more comfort with the ratio of benefit to burden on that the upside on this project is a lot more housing units. So I would certainly agree with the continuing to have this commission recommend to council that they focus on displacement and particularly programmatic solutions. But I'd be a little bit careful of saying what we're comfortable with.
I think I probably said that poorly. Yeah, we have a discomfort with displacement impacts of any project that causes homes to be taken down, and therefore encourage the city to look at that. Yeah.
And you also said something that I would take bothers me, and I think we might have inadvertently said this with RIP. We don't know whether the people renting a house that's going to be torn down for redevelopment won't be able to afford the replacement dwellings. there's no basis for this implication that the renters in these houses are of an income level that they won't be able to afford replacement. We have no data that says that. And so I think we want to be careful in this sort of apologetic assumption, well, the people who will be displaced won't be able to afford replacement housing. We simply don't know that. We hope, as we've discussed here today, that we hope this opportunity for more affordable housing will come to fruition. So we may well be displacing 2 people renting a house and creating 4 affordable units. So I just want to be careful that we don't sort of inadvertently suggest that not only are we displacing these people, they won't be able to afford to live in our city anymore. That's not what we're trying to accomplish here, and I don't think we should imply that's what we're going to accomplish.
I think we're talking about potential.
Well, anything's potential. These may, but it's a negative potential. One negative outcome is they can't afford to live anywhere other than this old house that's going to be torn down. On the other hand, there's an equally strong potential. Not only will they, as a lower income person, find affordable housing, 3 other people from somewhere else in the city may find. So I just think it's drawing attention to a negative potential and not drawing attention to the equally strong positive potential.
I like the idea of presenting RIP and BHD as some sort of package. I think there's a strong underlying common philosophy behind these two, and that is to essentially regulate the form and liberalize the density. Obviously in 2 completely different zones with 2 different areas, hence the perhaps the less concern or the benefits are greater in terms of what you can do per site. But overall, I think it's the approach that we need to go. And the last slide that we looked at earlier, the displacement analysis, I think Brett brought it home for me when we're looking at, and this was duplex, fourplex, but it can be applied up and down as far as scales go, where your income for a family of 3 goes from 132,000 for a duplex to 73,000 for a fourplex. It's essentially half. So to me, that goes towards greater flexibility, greater options for people to find places to live that they can afford depending on where they are in life, where they are in their age and life cycle. So I think they both do they have a lot of similarities. They do a lot of different, the code is completely different, but at the same time, the underlying philosophy is the same. So I support kind of presenting them as such.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts?
Well, just that there's some wonderful design changes especially for East Portland. I mean, that was the idea behind the project in the first place. So it would be good to have the benefits in the letter that have, I can't list them all off, but there was a lot. Bill put in a lot of work to make as much change to that sort of the long skinny lots to somehow make it so that when development comes, it's just more livable space for people, and that to me is the biggest positive of the project.
Okay. That sounds good. Thank you very much, staff.
Thank you.
We are adjourned.
You did it.